Are we born feeling worthy, do you think?
Let's start off with just a really little question. Um, I don't know. I think some of us probably have are a little bit more oriented to feeling that way than others. And then there's the whole how did you grow up and what was nurtured aspect. And that goes a long way. I mean, so the nature versus nurture conversation is you could have it almost when it comes up to any trait or aspect of personality, I it, but not having that lens on it, I definitely think I do know some people who just have always seemed more aware of their inherent self-worth than others.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that's just they were born that way or that is a message that was affirmed
Mhm.
or debunked through and not just from their family but through school
Mm.
things like that. So it's what do you think?
Like I'm thinking literally like once you come out and you're like in someone's arms, right? Like in that moment, are you like, oh, I'm super worthy? You know what I mean? Like that first moment of like air or whatever. Like,
Yeah,
because we can't ask anyone, we can't really know. But like,
right,
I'd like to know, like, at that moment, are you like, oh, I'm here and I'm existing and that's cool. And everyone is happy I exist, or I don't know, right? You don't
right,
really know what happy is. You don't have names for any of these things yet.
right. It's all
Um,
that stuff that I think we just call a birthright, such as breathing and hopefully nourishment and comfort, things like that. And then at some point, sooner than later, for some people, then maybe that comes into question,
right,
or yeah, or somebody else brings it into question. Yeah,
right. Yes. And I like the birthright thing because it's like, yes, like you're born, it's your right just because you were born.
for
And
existing. Right.
right. And I think growing up, some people learn, oh, I can't exist unless,
Yeah.
or it's not really great that I exist unless, you know, and that's probably part of like when the self-worth stuff starts to be like, oh, it's not my birthright to be here.
And it's interesting because for some people, even if you're getting that, you need to hustle for this worthiness type of thing. Um, and yet some people still have that really inherent sense of self-worth.
Right, even though they did
That's
hustle.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It is so interesting. And like I watch a lot of documentaries about like, NBA players or famous people or
Sure.
whatever, and it's just so interesting. I feel like there's a lot in those stories about there was someone there that really truly believed in them, And then I think that really goes against the whole, and I wrote this down. You have to love yourself before someone else can love you. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
So, so that's really interesting because I know a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine's an educational psychologist, and in many years ago, the research showed that kids really need only two people who actually believe in them, and they don't have to be family members. It could be a teacher, a mentor, somebody that two people, two adults in their life makes the difference. Well, that research has been replicated and shown it's actually just
Oh,
one adult. So if you meet somebody at summer camp who just really believes in you, sees you in a different light than you've been seen before, a teacher at school, that your awesome weird aunt, that is enough. I mean, we would love for children to have a village of people who believe in them, but it really is important that there's at least one. And that seems to be the tipping point, whether or not people, a path in life, let's say, a path that is informed by uh, strong sense of self worth or otherwise. But to your question, or to that, oh gosh, you have to love yourself before others can love you. Is that what you said? What are
yeah.
the words?
Yes. I mean, it's just one of those things that floats around constantly on the internet and in like self-help and like self-love things. There's a lot of stories of like, I didn't find my true love until I loved myself, and I didn't find this until I truly loved myself. But then when I watch these documentaries and I see these amazing people, I hear a
Yeah.
story about so and so really believed in me and just this really affirmed that I could do this, even though all these other people said I couldn't. This one person believed in me. So, you know what I mean? So I'm like,
I,
all these people that made it all the way up here, they had someone who believed in them before they believed in themselves. So what are we saying?
I think that's hogwash. Quite, I think it's absolute rubbish. And for some people, maybe that's when they had that moment of realization.
Right.
Uh, or maybe it fits into the narrative they've been told, oh, finally, or they didn't allow themselves to realize that. But anybody who's, if you haven't loved yourself or believed in yourself, but you've had a small pet, you didn't have to love yourself before you loved that pet, or believe that pet. And I use the animal example because so many of us just found such refuge with animals or kinship or friendship and wouldn't think about having to love ourselves first before that. So I think it's a an old tired saying that maybe has been the case for a few people, but it's replicated and then people think, oh, I have to do that. And quite honestly, I think it really sucks because if you're stuck not feeling like you can love yourself or believe in yourself, now there's this other layer of, oh crap, I'll never find somebody to love me until I love myself. And it just is like, why burden yourself with these extra side quests that are completely unnecessary?
Yeah.
It might happen that that's the order, but it's not the recipe.
Mm. That's a
Yeah.
good that's a good point. It's not the
Yeah.
recipe. Right.
And it's when things like that are hashed around, I think it often shows a real lack of critical thinking, and it's just regurgitation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a lot of what uh, weaponized therapy speak or psychology by meme tends to be. Very well intended. And, I was just saying to some clients the other day, um, I feel like sometimes when people are sharing this mind blowing meme or something that was on social, and I may have done this too. And I'm like, that's psychology 102.
mm,
Maybe you didn't have it in the rudimentary must take this class to pass or to graduate 101, but it's like psychology 102. And it's not necessarily new information. And maybe it's hitting them at a time where it makes more sense. It just lands differently,
mhm.
or hits differently, as my son might say. But it's pretty basic. So if people are struggling, I say just read some developmental and or depth psychology.
Oh, like what? That, you know.
Oh, I mean, you can just Google it. There's just so of course nothing is really coming to mind right now in
Oh,
terms of
okay.
this, but there are canons of this that um, I just see really basic concepts shared over and over again. It's like,
Yeah.
that's yeah.
Right. And basic concepts shared, but then without the nuance and the context and like any of the other things that go along with it.
Yes, I'm a really big fan of context, nuance, and discernment. But truly, I mean, if it doesn't make sense for you, I see a lot of people trying to stuff themselves into concepts that ultimately don't work for them. So
Hmm.
in the Middle Ages, this always sits with me. There was a torture device called an Iron Maiden. It's also a heavy metal band in
Hmm.
the 70s and 80s. Um, but an Iron Maiden, I think if people want to Google it, they'll probably find it. It was the shape of a small, petite woman, an iron cast with spikes in it. And part of what it was, you were shoved into this Iron Maiden, you were shoved into fit the shape that wasn't you. And I think that's such an interesting metaphor when we're trying to shove ourselves into paradigms or frameworks that are bandied about online that ultimately lack the context of our situation,
Yeah.
lack nuance. It's not this binary necessary, and discerning is this even right for me. So some things can be very helpful, but I think you have to be judicious and understand how it's used. Is that person? memes really lack nuance,
Right. And
and
one might,
nuance so
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 important.
important. Yeah.
And one might say you might want to, work on your healthy boundaries before you start.
I think so, and I know you're a big fan of that. For those who don't know, you're an outstanding healthy boundary coach. You
Oh,
do a really
thank you.
nice job, and I love how you bring the body into that as well.
Well,
Um,
that was the thing that I was really missing was the boundaries piece
yeah.
with my body work.
Oh, okay. Hmm.
I didn't know that was what it was until I took your Healthy Boundaries for Kind People course.
Yeah.
But what was happening for me at the time was that I was engaging in all of these practices,
Hmm.
and I was trying to please my mentor or coach
Oh,
versus,
yeah.
and like I'm a good student.
Yeah.
I just am like
Yeah.
I enjoy studying, I enjoy learning, I enjoy getting 102 or an A plus plus, like that's my
Yes.
personality.
Hmm.
So I want to do what the person says and I want to do it and with body stuff, that's not always right, like the way.
Right. Right.
Especially when you're working with someone who's helping you improve your health, you
Hmm.
want to know, is this the right path for me? Versus like, am I just, you want to know what the right path is for you, not just like following a protocol of what the right path is according to the practitioner.
Right.
And I would get really confused. And I
Hmm.
even stopped like doing strength training for a little while because I
Okay.
was so concerned about, am I doing this right? Is my posture correct? Like, is this the right number of reps? Is this the right, am I taking enough rep? You know what I mean? Because it
Yeah.
can get really, once you study movement and strength training and everything, there's so much complexity to it. So,
Absolutely.
right. And
Right.
I wanted to be so right.
I think a lot of people, whether and we can talk about people pleasing because there is an element of people pleasing, possibly a very big element. And the more I study about the art and science of coaching, that really frustrates me. That are we coaching? Obviously, maybe it's not obvious. Most coaches really want their people to do well and
Hmm.
succeed, but their way isn't the only way,
Hmm.
right? So that's why I hope I present my work like a smorgasbord.
Hmm.
Take what works for you, leave what doesn't, as opposed to you must do these things or you are not worthy.
Well,
Because
yeah.
if you're approaching it like you are wanting to be a good student, and I think a lot of people who want to improve themselves have that, want to do well, and please people, that's really about serving the ego to some degree,
Hmm.
the ego of that coach. And coaches, and I'm using coaches very broadly here, need to have that awareness. Are they doing this to try to please me, or are they doing it because it works for them?
Hmm.
And that is, it can be harmful
Hmm.
at worst, and it can be really frustrating at best.
Yeah.
That if somebody's trying to fill the prescription, so to speak, or a very prescriptive way that does not allow for nuance, complexity, as you were talking about, or really seeing that as an individual who's going to need their own way of doing it. So you can hold a framework, but you don't apply it the same way to each person, nor should somebody try to do that. It's
Right.
it's a it's a
Yeah.
trap. But I think, just to circle back, there can be a very strong element of people pleasing, which definitely is, if you had a Venn diagram of boundaries, there'd be a lot of overlap over those two circles.
Mhm.
But I'm a student of Harriet Breaker's work on people pleasing, and Breaker defined people pleasers as folks who derive their self worth by what they can do for others. Now, that is a lot, and it breaks down, but a lot of us don't want to disappoint. We want to be the good students. We want this person for who we really see as really good at what they do to see some of that in us and throw us a bone. And yeah, so I can see where in that dynamic you're wanting to please your coach almost as much as you're wanting to do the thing you initially came to them for.
Right. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm following your diet perfectly. I'm following this perfectly. Like, why? And then and then the trick too is when you're the coach. you do want the person to follow, your set out program, so to speak, or whatever,
Yeah.
because,
Hmm.
this is what I feel will help you get to where you're saying you want to go.
Right.
Um, and then I think there's this point though where as a coach, if the person is following what you're saying and then they're not getting the result, you need to redo your program for this person versus like making it somehow that it's their fault that the
Oh
program
my
isn't
gosh.
working, right?
Yes. Yes. And that can be a very collaborative process. So let's both look at this. What do we think's not working such that we can adjust it to something that works even better?
Mhm.
And that's super duper important. There has to be reflexivity in how we go about a program or how we are facilitating or the practitioner of a program, which
Mhm.
means constant adjustment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's there. There's a responsibility to that.
Right. And if
Yeah,
I think so the other day, one of my clients, she said it was okay if I talk a little bit about this.
sure.
Um, I was like, my goal for you is to do walking lunges. Like that's my dream for you. I don't know, something silly like that. And she was like, that's my worst nightmare, and I respect that because like, and I'm like,
Yeah,
okay, if you don't, if you really, really don't want to do that, and like I'm talking like a year from now or whatever,
right.
that's fine. And like, I'll never anymore face up, force, or like have someone do an exercise that they truly hate or stop doing an exercise that they truly love because someone said this exercise isn't good or what, like
Right.
there's so much complexity with the body that like
Yeah.
enjoyment is so important of like the thing that you're doing. If you're miserable doing the thing, I just don't think it's gonna work.
Nope. I mean, unless it's causing, there are probably some conditions, but unless it's causing harm,
Right. Like, unless this is
yeah,
truly causing you a serious injury or something is happening that's just like resulting in the opposite of what you want.
right.
But
Hmm.
that's where good coaching comes in, right? Like, is this really hurting the person? Like,
Yeah.
you have to figure that out with the person,
Yep.
right?
Hmm. And
On
and
the
I think to that point, if it's not enjoyable and somebody is struggling with exercise in this case anyway, that's not going to help the
right,
overall
right.
goal of making it work
Yeah.
and sustainable.
I remember one of the first questions I asked you because I used to get this a lot that I hold grudges and it's not a good thing to hold grudges or something like that.
Hmm.
And I asked you something, the question was something like, how do you know if you're holding a grudge or how do you know if you're standing up for yourself?
Mm.
And you were like, what if you need to hold a grudge to stand up for yourself? And I was like, oh.
Oh,
You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
we like take all of these things like you're not supposed to do this or you're not supposed to
yeah,
do that, right? Um, don't abandon yourself is like a big thing now. Like be on unapologetically you, don't abandon yourself. Like what does that really mean? And then are you doing something bad if you're not unapologetically you, all the time? Like you know what I'm saying?
right. Yeah, that's uh, there's a lot of pathologizing of our behavior, and
Mhm.
and also there, I think again, therapy by meme or coaching by meme. It seems like we have to fix things, or we shouldn't feel this way. A big one for me is around the topic of forgiveness, which can go in there too. It's like who made up the rule that some emotions or feelings are okay, but others aren't.
Mhm.
I think they're just messengers. They're just giving you information about where you're at and how you are in relationship to something. So, I mean, whose story is that? Why would I want to take on somebody else's story of a grudge is bad or a grudge is good? Let's see how it works for me. Why is that inherently, I think in this context, bad?
Right. And I think
Maybe
that
that's the fuel to stand up for yourself. That's probably what I said.
And I think you even were like, well, what do you think a grudge means? Or like, get into the definition of like,
Yeah,
look it up. What is a grudge, right? Like, look it up.
right.
What is,
Mhm.
abandonment, right? Like, what does that word actually mean, right? Things like that can be really fun and interesting to do if you're a nerd like me. So,
And I am. Absolutely. Yeah.
and speaking of weaponized therapy speak, and I'm guilty of this to some extent. There's this talk now about like your feelings are valid, and like a lot of people are saying like your anger is valid, like this is valid, and all this kind of stuff. And I was just wondering, I kind of know what you think about that,
Uh-huh.
but you can go ahead and tell me what you think about
I think no shit, it's valid.
it.
I'm having it. I don't need somebody else to validate my thought. And I think a lot of uh, possibly people who are well intended, trying to be helpful, they're not sure what else to say. So that's what comes out.
Mhm,
Okay. And maybe the thing is listening. That's the thing. I mean, I don't necessarily, I mean, there's some things I can imagine it'd be nice to not imagine. I'm thinking of it's nice to have somebody, say, yeah, that's a valid point or something like that.
mhm,
But not thoughts or feelings. I
mhm.
mean, somebody told me that's not a valid feeling. So that would be an issue. And sometimes those thoughts and feelings are really temporary, right? They're not going to be there for long. So when I hear things like that, I really, I have to remind myself that they're trying to help.
Mhm.
And that might be the verbiage that feels like helping, but no shit, Sherlock.
Right, right. Like,
Part of me. Yeah.
right.
Yes.
So if someone says
Yes. My
like
thoughts and feelings are valued, or valid, excuse me, and valued. Thank you.
yes.
Yeah.
So like if someone said, I feel angry, you might say, well, this is not a good, maybe a good example because there's no context, right? But like let's say
Right.
I say like I feel angry, you know.
And am I coaching you?
Right, yeah.
Okay. Um, oh, tell me more about your anger. Because right now I don't know what angry means to you. I don't know what you're angry about. Are you angry that you're feeling angry? Are you angry at the thing? So let's unpack it. It's the term. But and that's why we use those terms because we also know what they mean. So they're shorthand. But let's look at the construct, the existential constructivist aspect of that. Of what do you mean?
Right.
Okay, as opposed to that's valid. And I have no idea what you. First of all, I don't even know what you mean.
Right.
So you're angry. Okay, tell me about the anger. How do you
Mhm.
feel about being angry? What are you angry at? Are you okay with anger? What can anger fuel for you that maybe a lack of anger may not? Going back to a grudge, because
Mhm.
that's often one that is villainized. Uh, you're so angry. Like, yep. And it's fuel. It's for me in times of my life where I've been really angry. It's been huge fuel for change
Mm.
that I don't know if I would have necessarily had that type of change without the anger fueling it. Do I like the feeling of anger? Generally, no. There've been a couple times I've actually savored, but um, generally, no. So I think when somebody's saying I'm feeling angry, for example, okay, there's discomfort with what they're feeling. So
Mhm.
let's feel around to see if there's discomfort. What's the discomfort?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then like sometimes I feel like people are also doing a lot of over analyzing of things. Like it's almost like you can't have just like a normal conversation anymore. It's like, oh, did you say that? Because blah, blah, blah. You know, it's like trying to unpack everything
Right.
in daily life, or even like somebody comments on a post, right? And they say something you don't like, maybe, and they're like, well, I'm sorry your mom didn't like you when you were little, you know, like, or I'm sorry you feel like
Yeah.
people start unpacking other people or trying to unpack them
Yep.
based on like one sentence, you know, or like,
Or the version of that I see a lot is, well, that's a projection. What?
right.
What? Not necessarily. But yeah, and there seems to be a right to it, and that's often there's no consent. Let me unpack that for you.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Isn't
right.
that interesting?
And with the projection stuff too, it's like nobody's allowed to feel anything anymore. It's like we all have to kind of be like Zen walking something. I don't know. You know what I mean? Do
Right.
you understand?
Absolutely. I mean, projection, there's a reason the word exists because some things are a projection or transference or countertransference, depending on the context, but it doesn't mean everything is. And so, yeah, you could just be with the trying to understand what, I think you're so eloquent how you put that together. Sometimes that feeling is, like I said, like the weather. It's going to, the sky is there, but the weather comes and goes. It might come back around, but we don't necessarily have to analyze and
Yeah.
get into all of that. And so, I mean, a great question might be, how do you want to be with it? That sounds a little, that could be a little much too, even. But in a
Yeah.
coaching's context, are you okay with that?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I feel like a lot of the that happens because of Instagram and because somebody sees a meme and then they just like um, see a pattern that's actually not there. They're kind of
Yeah.
like creating that pattern in their mind to fill some gap that they don't understand, right? And it's like
Which is
that,
human behavior. Yeah,
right? And it's human because we want to know, like we want
exactly.
clarity, we want, what's the word I'm looking for? Certainty. We want certainty,
Sure.
like, right? Like this is why this is. And it's like, well, it could be 8 million other reasons.
Right. There's a huge, I mean, you bring up an outstanding point of people wanting to know where somebody's coming from or where you're coming from so that there is certainty because a lack of certainty can be very, and we're, as a country, we're swimming in that right now.
Mhm.
It's really uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
so I think often we're trying to, saying we're trying to seek to understand, we're also trying to find comfort
Hmm. Right.
because that liminal in between space
Sucky.
is a
Sucky.
tricky one. Yeah. Being okay, whatever that means with uncertainty it's a big step. And some things that you might be that way with, but others when it comes to these topics, ooh.
Right. Yeah. It's one of the worst. I think it's like a very not good feeling, right? Because it's
Yeah,
like it's almost like you're walking and like the steps are appearing as you're walking.
right.
But you're like, is there going to be a step or am I just going to like fall down into the abyss of nothingness, you know? It's
Yeah,
like not a very good feeling to feel that way.
no, right.
Um, and also with that, I feel like sometimes I hear things like, oh, this person is so unconscious or whatever. And I'm just like, how do you know they're unconscious? Like, how do you know that they just didn't stub their toe and then like they can't think properly because they're in so much pain? You know what I mean? Like, it's again with the certainty of like,
Yeah,
and almost this, I feel like a lot of the I don't want to like hate on new age stuff because some of it I think can be helpful. Like,
sure,
you can't throw out everything, right? But
sure.
uh, what I'm finding in some communities is that the superiority like feeling like I'm better than blah 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 or
Hmm.
I'm better than this person. And I'm like, well, I think then if you're feeling that way, like that's definitely not the direction of like of
Yeah,
enlightenment or whatever it is that you're seeking. Like,
right.
right. Um, and I used to do that too.
Hmm.
Like a lot of the things that I did, I was like, okay, as long as I'm a little bit better than everyone else, I'll be okay. Or for some reason, you know. But it was because I didn't have any boundaries. Like I didn't really know what my values were. Like
Right,
I still had these like these imposed values from growing up that really weren't mine and I didn't
right.
actually care about, but they were how we lived. So I thought that's
Sure,
how we had to do things, right? So
right,
it just seems like such a almost basic thing to go over your values and live by them, right?
right.
Like,
Mhm.
but when you actually do it, it's like, oh, I haven't been doing this, even though I'm claiming that this is a value that I am saying I live by or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
Absolutely. When you're talking about conscious, and I see that a lot, this is a conscious business or things like, particularly in that, I have I have found that in some ways, not all, that's often shorthand for you're unconscious if you don't agree with me.
yeah.
It's like you're conscious if you do. Um, and that's kind of the shorthand that I have often experienced it. And I don't know that people intend that. I think they're often looking for a very holistic way. But when you're saying you've done that too, I think that's part of growth,
Mhm.
right? We often, whether it's values or this looks like it's the way to do this, we start walking the path, and it's by walking or doing something that we either find what does or doesn't work for us. Like,
Mhm.
oh wow, no, whoa, this is not it. And then often there's shame or embarrassment.
Mhm.
But that's how learning happens.
Mhm.
That's how we discover ourselves. So compassion for somebody who may have called me unconscious, and compassion for my process of realizing that wasn't the place for me, can really be helpful. I
Mhm.
think by and large, everybody's doing the best they can. And that looks different for different people and on different days. But I like what you said about the imposed values, because that happens all the time, because we hear it, but we don't necessarily ask what that means.
Mhm.
Where we're told this is what our family values, and we don't necessarily ask what that means, much less take stock of what your values are, independent from that. And there might be many shared values. I mean, that
Right.
happens, right?
Yeah. And that's tricky too, right? I feel like I also grew up like kind of like this I wanted to be like a rebel or whatever. And I think what sucks when you have that in your head is sometimes you won't do something because that person that you don't like wants you to do
Yeah.
that thing, even though you want
Yeah.
to do it anyway.
Yeah. As somebody who has a bit of a rebellious streak, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like we'll shoot ourselves in the foot for the sake of being rebellious, even though that could be a good thing for us. Or, I mean, I remember several times, my mom or dad would say, "You need to do this." It's like, shoot, because it didn't sit with it didn't necessarily sit with my narrative. I outgrew that. I have to check it every now and then. Am I doing this for the sake of being rebellious, or because it's the right thing for
Mhm.
me?
And
But I think that's part of the growth. We were just talking about part of the learning.
yeah, it was so helpful with the boundaries work too, because I could put all that in check. I could be like,
Yeah,
doesn't matter. I still want to do it. It's still me. I'm gonna do it. Like, I don't care. Fine, you can say that you told me that was a good idea or it was because of you. It wasn't because of you. It was because of me,
it's
and I know
people
and
have their story.
whatever. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I think a really helpful way, if you're struggling, like, my family said I should do this, or I've been told this is the value, and crap, it actually is. But it has different meaning to you. And it's there to be honored. And you don't have to honor it in the same way, or it may look the same. But other people are going to think what they think anyway. I mean, there's very little we can do to change that. So you might as well do what works for you.
Right. Either way. And it's
Yeah,
just like, you could figure out however you want to spin your story. That's like your problem.
right.
And my,
You also really like air, as do they. But I'm not going to deprive myself just, yeah.
right.
So, yeah, that was probably,
But it
yeah,
does feel like that. I've often wondered how to get certain people's attention who I felt weren't giving me attention.
sure.
And I noticed over the years, only a way to do that was to be like very ill or like
Mm,
not well, you know?
right.
And sometimes, so to your point of like not breathing, right? It's like, well, maybe if this happened, they would pay attention, or like I would, whatever.
Absolutely. Right.
And to your point, it's like, well, that's not that's not going along with my values to do that to myself, right? Like I need air.
Yeah.
I need to be well. Like I want to be well. Like and um also to your point of like people are going to think what they want to. If somebody has decided you are this and they're not going to undecide it anytime soon or have any interest in undeciding it, there's nothing that you can do to
So
change.
what? Yeah. That's they think what they're gonna think. And so we really want to have control over that. It's so and
Yeah,
that's where I go. Somebody will say, but they think this, and I say, so
right.
does that actually have impact on you? You might not like it. You can certainly live with it, and then eventually you find it has far less impact if you're making peace with what works for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's more of the stop abandoning yourself thing, right? Is
Mm,
more is this in line with my values versus like um
yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
and then because the stop abandoning yourself thing or be unapologetically you, you could then perform to be whatever
Yeah.
you think people will think you being unapologetically you means, right? Like,
Yes.
I don't know, like some people will say, oh, that person is just so loud and they wear bright colors and they're just so unapologetically themselves. And it's like, well, what if a quiet person who wears neutral is that's them? Like, are they then supposed to just put on purple and pink and be loud because someone said that's what unapologetically you means?
Right.
It's just gets
Yeah.
really
It's
wild out there in the wild, wild west of meme
Mhm.
psychology and like whatever. You can
I,
get,
a couple of years ago, I was calling it performance authenticity. Look how authentic I am, and for some people that was absolutely that. But then it was being replicated by others for whom that was not
yeah,
necessarily authentic. And it's yeah. Mhm. But
right.
I love the point. You if this person's being praised for being them, and but that's not you, you're probably not going to get as much praise. But you're being you,
Yeah, like
and that
can
looks different on different days anyway.
right, like why can't we praise the people who just are themselves and they just happen to fit in whatever mold it is? You know what I
Yep.
mean? I feel
Yeah.
like just because you fit in a mold doesn't mean that that's not you. You just
Right.
like I consider like several times I've thought, I just wish it was me that I wanted to be an accountant. You know, like
Mhm.
because
Right.
I have my degree in accounting and I got a very good job out of school with that. And I
Hmm.
just really wanted that to be me so bad.
Sure.
And I think people were like, you took the easy way out. And I'm like, I absolutely did not take the easy way out.
No.
I took
Yeah.
the hardest possible way out, but it was just that was just it. I didn't have another choice, really, you know.
Hmm.
So sometimes when I see people like my accountant who loves
Right.
accounting, he can recite the tax laws like because he loves them. I can tell, you know, like he
Right.
just loves it. I'm like, gosh, you are so lucky to be in this world like that.
Right. That's great. I mean, that's what you want doing your books,
Right.
looking
Highly
at things.
recommend him anyway.
Right.
But you know, like I want the person who lives and breathes what they do.
Yes.
Like that they love it so much. You're my
Hmm.
person. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Like like
Yeah.
you with boundaries. I'm like, that's my lady right there. Randi Buckley. Because it's just kind of flips everything I've ever heard on its
Mm.
head. And it's like, maybe. Let's find out. I don't know,
Yeah.
right? You're not like, yep, this is the way. You have to do it my way, or like, bye, you know, like,
I really believe when it comes, so I'm doing doctoral work on this right now, and we're looking at why this boundary work seems to be as effective as it is for so many people, and doing research around that. Um, and I really, it's only affirming that any boundary work that is prescriptive, and not just boundary work, there are lots of aspects, lots of different topics this would go under. And it lots in the other types of coaching I do as well. But whenever it's super duper prescriptive, it's it's back to that Iron Maiden. I said it's set up for somebody else, not for you. So then you're going to feel like you see, I can't do it. I have failed again because it's not in alignment with who you are. It's not taking into consideration all the things we take into consideration when we're looking at that. Rather, let's treat it as a framework and say, find yourself within this context. Oh, and if the parts that don't work for you, just leave that part out because why would you wear shoes that are too small? Right?
Right.
It's only going to hurt. So
Yeah.
just take the parts that fit. If you then say, "Ooh, but I want to develop this aspect more," great. But it's given you a framework to start to do that in a way that's very aligned and is, one of my definitions for boundaries is that they are values in action. We have multiple definitions because they mean different things in different contexts. Um, but what are the values here that we want to honor? What values are missing such that we need to be able to bring them in? And when anything that is just super duper prescriptive feels like a setup for failure.
Hmm.
And then that sucks. But then you also have this affirmed message of, see, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that bites.
Yeah, it does. And
Yep.
also, like, you can't take it with you. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like, I
Yeah.
take this with me everywhere. It's like always with me, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, whenever I have a problem or like something, let's say with a person, and I don't know
Mm-hmm.
how to respond or whatever, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
what do I want my relationship to be with this person?
Yes.
You know? I'm like,
Yeah.
that's
And
what
suddenly,
Randy would say.
but when you ask questions like that, they also become a bit of a compass. Oh, okay. I want this. Well, then I need to work on these things. What
Right.
value do I want to honor here? Okay. It's compassion. What would compassion do? What would compassion say? How can it evoke or invoke, depending on the situation, more compassion? And then you start to use those things as a bit of a compass. So that value in this case also becomes instructive. When you're asking, what do I want this relationship with this person to be? That then becomes instructive, not just informational. And that's really, really helpful because then it's true to you.
Yeah. And then I
Yeah,
don't,
it's not what it should be according to somebody else.
right. And
Yeah.
it's just, I felt like I was following those things for so long and I couldn't understand why things weren't working. And it was
Mm,
because it wasn't what I want. It had nothing to do with what I wanted.
right.
Really. It was like, how can I make someone not like me or
Yeah.
be at peace, like keep the peace, I guess, or whatever.
Sure.
Right.
Mhm.
Because it's important to keep the peace for, depending on your situation, right?
Right.
But at a certain point, it's not important to keep the peace anymore.
That might
Right.
be. Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's just so many good questions versus so many good rules to follow.
Oh, I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I love that you've experienced it that way. Because when I'm thinking about, that the example you use, keeping the peace, well, who are we keeping the peace for? Is it actually for you? Or is it so other people aren't uncomfortable or have to deal with the issue at hand, but rather you're carrying it on their behalf? But it feels altruistic, feels like you're being a good person by keeping that peace, but it's ultimately not peaceful for you.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, I love how you look at that.
And
Very cool.
what another thing you say that I love and I think about a lot is am I being strong because the other person can't be strong or because so that the other person doesn't have to be strong? And I was like, "Oh, that's a good question."
Because I think it's often the case for a lot of women or people and folks who are doing a lot of emotional labor to be strong because it feels responsible
Mhm.
or carry the load because it feels responsible. And to some degree, we like being well, to a great degree, we like being the responsible one. We're good at it. We're doing all these things. And then it affirmed that aspect of our identity. Whereas but it just doesn't mean that I'm not doing it because they can't or they don't want to. And there is some variation, I think, with kids or people who
Hmm.
don't have the capacity to fully do that for whatever reason at that point. So that's where, again, where nuance comes into play.
Hmm.
But um, and then the other end of that spectrum is what is called weaponized incompetence. I
Hmm.
remember once my husband just said, I just can't wash the silverware because I'm not as good at it as you. Kiss my butt. Yeah, that's what I said. But and then he couldn't wash the silverware because he had fillings. He washes the silverware now. But um, but that weaponized incompetence, I mean, we'll see that in different. You're so much better at this than I am. Can you do it? You're, and it's like, I'm good at this.
Hmm.
We like that. Who doesn't
Hmm.
want to be good at something?
Right.
Yeah,
And and then though, like the other thing that I've had to learn is then if I ask someone else to do something and let's say they don't do it as good as me,
right.
I can't be mad at them about that unless they're
Rebellious is
purposefully,
right.
sucking to just not have to do it anymore,
Yep.
right? There's so much nuance, right? It's like so interesting.
If they threw a wrench in it on purpose, that's different. But if you said, "Hey, can you do this?" and they do it, to maybe not quite the best of their ability, but they do a noble attempt.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Right.
As
Right.
opposed to
Yeah.
what? Can't you do it right? Yeah.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
then you'll get that weaponized incompetence again coming back
Yep.
at you. Yep.
And you brought up capacity, which was something that I never learned in my life
Yeah.
before.
Sure.
And I never really heard it before. I don't,
Mhm.
because for so much of my life, it was just go, go, go,
Right.
accomplish this, achieve this, do that. And my capacity wasn't um, a question. It was like, just do it, like Nike, right? Just do it.
Right.
Which at sometimes is helpful, right? Because you just need to do some
Just
stuff,
power through. Yeah.
right? But sometimes you don't, or like it's not a good idea to. I didn't know that.
It's our we have a very good common friend, Monica, and she has said so and so's talking about capacity more, and so I'm hearing capacity talked about. I'm like, yes, we've been talking about it for a couple of decades, and I'm sure people are talking about it well before that, because it's really super duper important to recognize whether it comes to boundaries, whether it comes to working out, exercise, all sorts of things. Is you've got to consider the capacity, because capacity ebbs and flows over time. It's different from day to day. If I didn't get enough sleep, I'm not going to have the capacity of patience in if I had gotten enough sleep. When your hormones start to fluctuate or something, or different, just whether it's time of the month or time of life, your capacity is going to be different than when it was.
Right.
And so it's constantly expanding and contracting. And I don't know that. First of all, I think we, from a very American perspective, that we in the society that you and I have grown up in, more capacity is often rewarded.
Mhm.
You're a hard worker, you can work so long or something like that. But in somewhere we got the idea that that was preferred. Now,
Right.
to your point, sometimes we have to power through. It's a deadline. You've been dealt a crappy um, hand of cards in life that you just have to do it. But I'm not talking about this few times, but overall, when we can adjust and at least take our capacity into consideration, then we're not overextending and feeling resentful about it. We're not over functioning for
Mhm.
others so then they don't have to step up. All of those things. So I think that's a really important question and thing to honor
Yeah.
and then not be bummed out when I mean, sometimes we're disappointed. I'm sick. I can't do it.
Right.
It you know, and you can only work from where you're at.
Yep.
Yeah.
Didn't know that. And then remember, I don't know. I think you remember I grew a quarter inch after the course,
I
which
remember you
was
told me that.
so interesting because I've been doing body work for 10 years, like
Yeah.
with different practitioners, like very
Sure.
good people, whatever.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I was just like, this is weird.
And I remember when you said that. And I just was so delighted by that because you felt expansive in that sense. But one of the constructs we use or frameworks is that boundaries are like a spine,
Hmm.
and that goes that we have so many different things that means. From being able to bend and flex to support where you want to go, to giving rigor and structure. There are all these ways. And I had a chiropractor take the course once, and she said it was that. Everything else she was going along with, but just like it blew her mind when she got to that because she understood the spine. But I loved it in the very literal sense where you grew.
Maybe I grew a spine. Like, you know what I mean?
But like what was keeping you constricted, because we
Right.
know from the fashion physiology that can feel tight.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But
So
I just was that was really fun.
that was so fascinating. And that's why I was like, well, of course, boundaries relate to the body. Of course, this is so important for the body. This was
Yeah,
the missing thing that I have that I didn't study for my work,
yeah,
you know?
sure.
So anyway, thank you so much for that. Um,
Yeah.
and how can people work with you now? Like if they wanted to do some stuff.
Sure. So, in terms of the boundaries work, because it's not the only coaching I do, but in terms of the boundaries work, I have a new thing out there. It's called A Year of Healthy Boundaries. And every week I call it 52 bite sized lessons, teachings for I think it's like uh, a hyper responsible, over functioning, empathetic, all of us who tend to have to be challenged with boundaries,
Mhm.
or don't feel that you can have boundaries or feel that you're bad with boundaries. Those are 52 emails that you get throughout the year of different sorts. And it also gives people access to any workshops I happen to run at that time. So my next one, for example, is called Relationship Insurance, which is out of the boundary work. So you people can sign up for that, and that starts when you do. So if you started that day, you get an introduction in the first week. Once or twice a year, we also run something called Heal Thy Boundaries, which is you are an alumna of Healthy Boundaries for Kind People, which it's went from 6 months to a full year. It was the big body of work, which we're now doing the research on as part of the doctoral program. Uh, Heal Thy Boundaries, it's just a way too long answer, but Heal Thy Boundaries is a very potent version of that.
Mhm.
And that's going to start in September. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. And
Yeah.
so I'll put the links below and people can see
Great.
the caption and stuff like that. And then we'll put your contact and website on there if
Right
anyone
on.
wants to get in touch.
Sure.
And do you feel like there's like anything that you want to end with or like any encouragement possibly about boundaries or, whatever?
I think you are such a shining example of somebody who's done boundaries work, and then you're probably understanding now that it's never one and done.
Mhm.
It's iterative, and you're always going back to it because capacity is changing, circumstances in life, and it's almost like an onion. You're ready for the next layer. So, um, you and sharing, in our conversation today, I'm hearing insights that you've had that you've carried with you, but also new ones. And so I think that's such a nice reminder that there's always more. There's always more. And that doesn't mean you're bad at it. That means you know how to navigate it. And that's very cool.
So cool because life, right? So, you always
Yeah,
gotta have your healthy boundaries in your back pocket. You know what I mean?
yeah, absolutely. Or in your spine,
Right.
or as your spine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you
Yeah.
so much. I really had so much fun, and I hope people really get that things are so complex that you don't have to follow something just because it's on a sparkly meme on the gram or in a textbook that someone famous wrote or whatever. You can do whatever you want for the most part, without hurting other people.
We're
So,
all making it up anyway. I
right.
made this up.
Right.
I'm just finding that research also happens to back it up. Intuitive. I think most, having the confidence to trust yourself
Mhm.
goes a long way. And if you find, ooh, that wasn't the right choice, well then change your mind. That's okay.
Yeah, we didn't even get to that part, but that's huge too,
Oh,
right?
right. Yeah.
Well, maybe next time we'll do that. Little cliffhanger.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much for having me.